We've talked about the diffuse map that helps us to, add color to our object, any object which is projected on. You can see the preview over here. And we've talked about the roughness map. And we said this is a grayscale map that helps to either add roughness or smoothness to an asset or an object. And the lighter areas are the rougher areas, darker areas are the smoother areas. We've also talked about the normal map, and we talked about the fact that the normal map adds more details or definition to a surface based on the normal to that surface. Remember that we said that the normal is a perpendicular line to a surface, so we've been able to establish that. And we said for the displacement map, it also works like the height map, and it's a grayscale map. The grayscale map helps us to identify lighter areas. In this case, lighter areas are the higher areas, while the darker areas are the lower areas. Good. So what we'll talk about now is ambient occlusion. And when we talk about occlusion, it gives, the sense of blocking out, something from our view or casting shadow. Ambient occlusion maps are simply texture maps that help us to get the shadowed areas, data of shadowed areas or darkened areas. So I'm going to add the ambient occlusion map over here. And so far we have been adding textures by, clicking on any area, right click, we add the image texture node and all that. So I believe that we've been able to solidify, that aspect to it. So I'm going to do a faster method right now. We have a way to access our file browser right in Blender. So I can just come over to, this frame here. Once I see this cross sign, I click and drag to just create a new window that I can work with. So I'm going to click on this icon here. And once you click on the icon, we can now go to File Browser. And this helps us to expose our file browser right in Blender. So this is a faster way to do so. So now, because I have access to the most recent files that I have either downloaded to my system or I have worked with, I can easily see it over here. But in case you do not have this recent file showing the textures that you need, you can just scroll up a bit and navigate to where you have that file saved on your PC. So I'm selecting this texture file over here and I can see a bunch of textures here, and you can change the display mode so that we can see the textures themselves, the preview textures. Okay, so what I'm looking for is the ambient occlusion. As you scroll, you can see the different texture files you can work with. We have AO here, and this signifies the ambient occlusion, and this is also a grayscale texture map. So when I say grayscale, I'm talking about it being white and black. The ambient occlusion map, similar to the other grayscale map, helps us to identify areas that are darker in this case. So I'm just going to click on the ambient occlusion and drag it and drop it directly in Blender, and now you can see that we have our image texture node over here. Awesome. So I'm just going to close this by right clicking on this middle line here, because I do not want to import any other file. So I'll right click there, click on join areas, and ensure that the arrow is facing this way because I want to close this, and click on it, and this is good. Okay, so now we have the ambient occlusion, and the next thing we might be trying to find out is where are we going to plug this in, to the principled BSDF. Now the ambient occlusion can be mixed with the base color, but we would need to add an additional node called the mixed node. So I will just click on anywhere here, right click, and check on the search, mix, and we have different types of mix nodes, but what I need is the mix color node, because the idea is I want to mix these two colors, so I'm going to click on mix color and drop this over here. So I can go right ahead to work with joining these two or mixing these two and plugging it in, but I want to add an extra node to allow me to adjust the ambient occlusion influence on the material. So I can add an additional node, the ambient occlusion node. So I'll just click on any space over here and Shift A, and I can search for ambient occlusion. Awesome. So just like we've been doing before, we have the ambient occlusion color socket. I'm just going to click on this and drag it to the color socket of the ambient occlusion node. So the next thing is I want to connect the ambient occlusion setup to the mix color node, as well as the base color setup to the mix color node. Now, the order of arrangement can be done either way, but I usually like to connect the ambient occlusion to the B socket. I'll tell you why shortly, and the base color node over here to the A socket. Awesome. Now, if you look closely, you might not see anything happening right now, and that's because we still have the base color node connected to the principal BSDF. So what we just want to do is to get this result of the mix and drag it and replace, this node setup. Good. Once again, we're not seeing anything happen, and this is the reason why. We have the base color node plugged to the A socket and the ambient occlusion setup plugged to the B socket. When you have the factor 0, it tells you that you are going from A to B. So going from factor 0 down to factor 1 helps you move from base color that is plugged over here to ambient occlusion that is plugged over here. So you can see that as you move down the factors, so you can see the transition over here. Awesome. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is this option here that helps us to determine what kind of mixture we actually want to achieve. Now, I'm going to click on this drop down here, and you can see that there are different setups that you can try out. I always encourage trying things out yourself. But what I want to focus on is this multiply option here, and when you click on it, you would see that you now have the base color influence still being seen as you transition to the ambient occlusion over here. So there's this subtle change. Let me scroll in a bit so that you can see clearly. So let's look at the textures. So I'm going from the base color factor 0 down to the ambient occlusion factor 1. So you can see the change over here, and it's really subtle. So I'm just going to take it at maybe the midpoint here, and now down to the ambient occlusion node that we initially added, we can just work on the distance at which this effect is influenced. And you might not be seeing anything right now. What we need to do is we need to switch to the rendered mode. So you can click on Z and go to rendered, or click on this option over here. So once you do so, as you move through the different values, you'll be able to see it's a very subtle change. If you look at this line here, you would see that there is the distance to which the shadow is being thrown at this edge over here. So let me zoom out and you can see what's happening. So it has more influence as you go over to higher values and lesser influence as you stay around 0.5 or so. Awesome. So this is how, to get things done with the ambient occlusion. And I will always say that, of course, you want to connect the vector mapping socket to the vector socket for any texture that you add, so that it will map correctly. So we're going to leave the color space still set to RGB because we need the color information for the ambient occlusion, and that's what helps us to work with the factor, going from the ambient occlusion to the base map, and we can find a middle ground for that. So we've been able to complete a whole lot of textures over here, and just to keep things neat, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to group this over here. So let's see, we have this and this here, and we can just right click, join a new frame, and we're going to rename this frame. Right click again, rename this as textures. Finally, it's important to rename your textures. So of course, we've been working with a wooden texture or so I'm going to just call this wood.